The smell of burning corn still haunts me, but not for the reason you'd think. I'm standing in what used to be 40 acres of perfect heritage corn. Now it looks like a damn war zone. Charred stalks crunch under my boots like broken bones, and the acrid stench of gasoline mixed with smoke burns my throat. Security camera footage shows exactly who did this. Delilah Thornfield, my HOA president neighbor, strutting through my field at 2 a.m. with a gas can, grinning like she'd just solved world hunger. This lunatic thought she'd torched some weekend hobby farmer's cute corn maze. What she didn't realize? This adorable little garden project was federally insured as a heritage seed preservation program. For $2.1 million? Yeah, Karen just committed agricultural terrorism on a multi-million-dollar research project. Whoopsie. What would you do if your neighbor burned your retirement dreams for sport? Drop a corn emoji if you're watching from farm country. Where exactly are you tuning in from tonight? Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this nightmare. My name's Ezra Caldwell. I'm 52, and 6 months ago I thought I'd found paradise. My eccentric Uncle Silas left me 47 acres of prime Iowa farmland, the kind of black soil so rich it practically glows in moonlight, earth that smells like rain and infinite possibility. I'd spent 23 years as an agricultural engineer for Dow Chemical, watching corporate suits turn farming into spreadsheet warfare. Endless meetings in sterile conference rooms that reeked of burnt coffee and shattered dreams. When my patent lawsuit settlement came through, let's just say it was enough to tell those bean counters exactly where they could plant their quarterly projections. My wife Nora, a librarian who'd grown tired of suburban book clubs discussing 50 Shades of absolutely nothing, jumped at the chance to escape Chicago's concrete prison. Our teenage daughter Iris rolled her eyes but secretly loved having 47 acres, where her TikTok videos wouldn't scandalize the neighbors. Uncle Silas had left behind treasure disguised as old man hoarding. His farmhouse was crammed with leather-bound journals that smelled like pipe tobacco and decades of accumulated wisdom, documenting 12 rare corn varieties he'd been preserving since the Carter administration. Cherokee Purple Flint, Painted Mountain, glass gem varieties with kernels that sparkled like scattered rainbow jewelry. Genetics most people assumed were deader than disco. When I contacted Dr. Rachel Yamamoto at the University of Iowa Agricultural Extension, her excitement practically vibrated through the phone lines. These varieties hadn't been seen in research labs for over a century. We partnered immediately. University provides genetic sequencing and academic credibility. I handle the actual dirt under fingernails work. That's when Rachel dropped knowledge that changed my entire perspective. She explained that USDA heritage crop insurance operates on a completely different planet than regular farming coverage. While commodity corn might fetch $3 a bushel, heritage varieties with unique genetic sequences get valued at their research potential, sometimes 100 times higher. My annual premium of $3,200 seemed outrageous until I grasped what I was actually protecting: irreplaceable genetic material worth millions in pharmaceutical and agricultural research. Suddenly, paying for premium coverage felt like the smartest investment I'd ever made. Enter our villain, Delilah Thornfield. 47, recently divorced, relocated from Des Moines after her husband's insurance fraud conviction made front-page news. She'd crowned herself president of Millbrook Manor Estates HOA, 23 cookie-cutter houses thrown together by a developer who disappeared faster than free beer at a church picnic. Delilah ambushed me at our mailbox during week 1, reeking of Bath and Body Works vanilla and barely contained fury. Her voice possessed that special quality, like a smoke detector having an existential crisis. Mr. Caldwell, I'm certain you're unaware that agricultural activities significantly impact property values in established residential communities. I gestured toward my thriving corn rows, where morning dew still sparkled on emerald leaves like nature's own jewelry. Ma'am, this property's been farmed continuously since 1847. Your subdivisions existed since 2019. She flashed a smile that could freeze molten lava. Well, we'll just see about that, won't we? The harassment campaign launched immediately. Noise complaints about my 1982 John Deere running at dawn. Apparently the sweet rumble of a perfectly tuned diesel engine violates delicate suburban sensibilities. Zoning violations for unauthorized commercial agriculture, because growing actual food is apparently criminal behavior now. Anonymous EPA tips claiming illegal pesticide usage, particularly hilarious since I run completely organic operations. Every complaint died when county officials discovered my grandfather clause protections and university research partnership. But Delilah kept escalating anyway. She'd patrol my fence line daily with her neurotic Pomeranian, documenting imaginary violations, while the dog's incessant yapping created a soundtrack that could wake hibernating grizzlies. I started calling these expeditions the Daily Karen Safari. The real warning came during July's oppressive heat wave. Walking my rows at sunrise, there's nothing quite like the whisper of corn leaves catching morning breeze. I discovered fresh boot prints in the soft earth and 200 stalks showing obvious herbicide damage in a suspiciously perfect geometric pattern. Time for confrontation. Herbicide damage? That's just overspray from my dandelion treatment, she said, batting mascara-caked eyelashes innocently. Delilah, dandelions don't grow in perfect rectangles. Are you accusing me of lying, Mr. Caldwell? I'm calling you creatively destructive. That conversation crystallized a terrifying realization. This woman wasn't your standard HOA busybody. She was genuinely unhinged and escalating fast. August rolled around with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've finished your morning coffee. The air hung thick as molasses, and even the corn seemed to wilt in protest. Delilah decided this was perfect weather to escalate from petty harassment to full-blown legal warfare. Her weapon of choice? The township's brand new noise ordinance, passed just 2 months earlier thanks to complaints from suburban transplants, who apparently thought rural Iowa should sound like a meditation retreat. She filed a formal complaint claiming my farm equipment violated the 7 a.m. noise restriction. Now here's the thing about farmers. We don't operate on suburban schedules. Crops don't care if Karen needs her beauty sleep. I'd been running my 1982 John Deere from 6:30 to 7 every morning, finishing exactly when the ordinance kicked in. Legal as sunshine on Sunday. But Delilah had done her homework with the obsessive dedication of someone who collects cats and grudges. She'd been secretly recording my equipment with some fancy decibel meter app, creating what she grandly called expert acoustic analysis. The woman actually submitted a 40-page report to the township compliance officer, who happened to be her cousin Garrett, a detail that should have raised more red flags than a Soviet parade. Garrett showed up at my door Thursday morning, sweating through his polyester uniform like a Christmas ham and wielding a clipboard like it contained the 10 Commandments. Mr. Caldwell, we've received multiple noise complaints. Daily fines start at $500. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the real stuff that could resurrect roadkill, and smiled. Garrett, you might want to check Iowa's right to farm statutes before you start threatening farmers who've been farming since before your grandmother was born. His confident expression cracked like cheap paint. What statutes? Time for some education. I'd spent considerable time researching agricultural protection laws after Delilah's first harassment campaign, diving into legal codes with the same intensity I once applied to chemical patents. Iowa Code. Chapter 3, 152 specifically protects agricultural operations established before residential development from noise complaints and nuisance lawsuits. My operation predated her precious subdivision by 72 years. The law was designed exactly for situations like this, preventing suburban sprawl from bulldozing established farms into HOA compliance. Agricultural operations with grandfather status get noise exemptions, I explained, watching Garrett scribble notes frantically like a student cramming for finals. You can't find farmers for farming on farmland that was farmed before your complainant was even a gleam in her daddy's eye. But here's where the plot thickened like cornstarch and gravy. While researching property boundaries for my legal defense, I discovered something Delilah had spectacularly overlooked in her rush to suburban domination. Her decorative fence, that white vinyl monstrosity she'd installed to maintain property aesthetics, encroached 3 feet onto my land. 3 feet doesn't sound like much until you realize it represents about $15,000 worth of prime agricultural soil at current market rates. I had my property professionally surveyed, and the results were more beautiful than a perfect sunrise over ripening corn. Not only was she trespassing, but she'd been trespassing for 8 months while filing harassment complaints against me. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. I served her with the surveyor's report and a formal trespass notice Tuesday afternoon. She answered her door wearing a bathrobe that probably cost more than my monthly tractor payment, her face slathered in some green beauty mask that made her look like a moldy potato left in the sun too long. "What's this supposed to mean?" she demanded, waving the legal papers like they were contaminated. "Your fence is on my property. You've got 30 days to move it." The shriek that erupted could have called hogs from 3 counties over. "That's absolutely impossible. I had this property professionally surveyed." "By who? Your cousin Garrett?" her green face flushed red underneath the mask, creating a Christmas color combination that belonged in a horror movie. "You can't prove anything!" But I could prove something much more interesting. During our fence dispute investigation, I'd noticed trampled corn rows and fresh boot prints leading directly from her property into my field like a guilty person's breadcrumb trail. Security cameras I'd installed after the herbicide incident captured her nocturnal adventures. 11 p.m., spraying something on my corn stalks with the dedication of someone marking territory. Next morning brought damning evidence. 200 more stalks showing herbicide damage in a pattern that spelled out "move" when viewed from her upstairs window. Subtle as a train wreck. I confronted her that afternoon, finding her watering petunias with the nervous intensity of Lady Macbeth scrubbing bloodstains. "Delilah, we need to discuss your midnight gardening habits. I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." But her voice climbed higher than a soprano hitting a bad note. "Security footage suggests otherwise. $800 worth of heritage seeds destroyed. Small claims courts looking mighty attractive right now." That's when she made her biggest tactical error. Instead of retreating, she launched a nuclear option. Filed a harassment complaint with the sheriff's office claiming I'd been menacing her with farm implements and threatening violence with agricultural equipment. Deputy Tommy Brennan arrived Friday evening, hat in hand, an apology written across his weathered face. Tommy grew up on a corn farm 20 miles south. He knew the difference between a farmer conducting business and actual threats. "Ezra, I gotta ask about these harassment allegations." His tone suggested he was going through bureaucratic motions. I showed him the herbicide damage, the trespass evidence, and the security footage. Tommy whistled low, the sound mixing with crickets beginning their twilight serenade. "She's got some serious brass, I'll give her that. Filing false reports is a misdemeanor in this county." "What's your recommendation, Deputy?" "Document everything. This lady's escalating fast, and desperate people make monumentally stupid decisions." Prophetic words. As Tommy's patrol car crunched down my gravel driveway, taillights disappearing into gathering dusk, I spotted Delilah's silhouette in her upstairs window. Phone pressed to her ear, gestures animated and furious. She was already plotting her next assault. The sweet evening air carried the scent of ripening corn and approaching trouble. September arrived with the kind of crisp mornings that make you believe in fresh starts. Air so clean it practically sparkled, corn stalks rustling their secrets in the early breeze. But Delilah had other plans brewing in her suburban laboratory of spite. Having lost the noise ordinance battle and discovered her fence was basically an expensive confession of trespassing, she switched tactics to something more insidious: death by 1,000 paper cuts. The woman had apparently attended the University of Bureaucratic Warfare and graduated summa cum laude. Anonymous complaints started flooding government offices like a biblical plague. EPA complained about unregulated pesticide use, completely fabricated since I run organic operations cleaner than a hospital operating room. OSHA complaint about unsafe grain storage practices. Hilarious considering my storage bins met standards that would make NASA engineers weep with envy. State revenue complaint about unreported commercial agricultural income, because apparently growing food automatically makes you Al Capone. Each complaint triggered mandatory inspections that devoured my time like a hungry combine harvester. Federal inspectors trooped through my fields with the enthusiasm of tax auditors, clipboards multiplying like rabbits, measuring everything twice and documenting it 4 times. The paperwork alone could have supplied a small library, but here's where Delilah's cleverness backfired more spectacularly than a defective firework. During my corporate days, I'd learned something invaluable. Bureaucrats document everything, including digital breadcrumbs that lead straight back to complainants. Government agencies are required to preserve electronic records, including IP addresses and submission timestamps, making false reporting easier to trace than muddy footprints on clean linoleum. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the complaint origins, and the results were more satisfying than finding money in winter coat pockets. Every single anonymous complaint traced back to the same IP address, Delilah's home internet connection. She'd been cosplaying as an entire neighborhood of concerned citizens, using fake names like worried resident Martha Johnson and environmental advocate Robert Smith, borrowing addresses from vacant houses like some kind of suburban identity thief. The woman had created a fictional army of outraged residents, all suspiciously sharing her writing style and her creative approach to agricultural terminology. Apparently, pesticides and environmental hazards were her literary signatures. I compiled the digital evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades documenting chemical processes. Timestamps, IP addresses, metadata from uploaded photos, It painted a masterpiece of systematic harassment that would make any prosecutor's day. Armed with this evidence, I strolled into the sheriff's office Tuesday morning, finding Deputy Tommy nursing coffee strong enough to wake hibernating bears and looking like paperwork was his personal nemesis. "Got another harassment complaint for you, Tommy. This one's got federal seasoning." His eyebrows shot up like startled roosters. Federal. Filing false reports to federal agencies crosses some serious lines. EPA investigators don't appreciate suburban busybodies wasting taxpayer resources on personal vendettas. But the universe's sense of irony wasn't finished. During the OSHA inspection, which I passed with colors so flying they needed air traffic control, Inspector Carl Hendricks made an observation that changed my entire trajectory. Carl, a veteran farmer turned safety expert, was examining my heritage corn varieties when his expression shifted from bureaucratic boredom to genuine excitement. "Mr. Caldwell, these varieties are absolutely exceptional. You ever consider federal agricultural grants?" Grants? Carl explained that rare seed preservation projects qualified for substantial federal funding through USDA's Agricultural Research Service. Heritage varieties like mine could generate $50,000 annually for seed bank expansion and genetic research. He connected me with Dr. Susan Chen, State Heritage Crop Coordinator, who practically vibrated with enthusiasm over my corn samples. The grant application process moved faster than small-town gossip. Within 2 weeks, I had preliminary approval for expanded research funding that would transform my hobby operation into a legitimate scientific powerhouse. The delicious irony: Delilah's harassment campaign had accidentally connected me with resources that would make my farm absolutely bulletproof. This development sent Delilah into a meltdown visible from low Earth orbit. Township gossip travels faster than internet rumors, and news of grant money reached her ears within hours. She materialized at the next township board meeting looking like she'd been electrocuted while eating sour grapes. "I demand an immediate investigation into Ezra Caldwell's fraudulent subsidy farming scheme," she proclaimed to the assembled crowd of 12 residents and one sleeping bloodhound. The board members, farmers and rural business owners who understood legitimate agriculture from actual fraud, listened politely while she ranted about taxpayer-funded hobby farming and exploitation of federal resources. Her voice achieved that special frequency that makes dogs howl and babies cry. I calmly presented my university partnership documents, research protocols, and grant materials. The contrast was stark: professional scientific documentation versus unhinged suburban conspiracy theories delivered at maximum volume. Board President Jim Morrison, farming since the Nixon administration, actually chuckled when Delilah accused me of defrauding hardworking Americans. "Ma'am, preserving agricultural heritage is precisely what these programs were designed for. Mr. Caldwell's conducting important scientific work." The meeting concluded with official board support for my research project and gentle suggestions that Delilah might redirect her civic energy toward more constructive community involvement. Diplomatic translation: please sit down and be quiet. But Delilah wasn't surrendering. As the meeting dispersed into the humid September darkness, she cornered me near the gravel parking lot, her cloying perfume mixing with fresh-cut grass in a combination that violated several Geneva Convention articles. "This isn't finished, Caldwell. I'll escalate this to state authorities if necessary." "Looking forward to it," I replied, keys jingling cheerfully. "State officials absolutely love hearing from federal grant recipients. Really adds legitimacy to complaints." The look she fired at me could have soured fresh cream, but something else lurked behind her fury: cold calculation mixed with desperate determination. Driving home under stars that had witnessed this land produce corn since before America was America, I couldn't escape the feeling that Delilah's next move would make everything else look like amateur hour. The night air carried the sweet scent of ripening corn and approaching catastrophe. October brought the kind of weather that makes Iowa famous: golden sunshine warming your face while crisp air nips at your ears, the perfect backdrop for what should have been harvest season bliss. Instead, Delilah decided to weaponize real estate against me with the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the skull. She'd hired what she generously called a property assessor, her unlicensed cousin Randy from Cedar Rapids, whose previous career highlights included selling insurance door to door and getting fired from a car dealership for creative accounting. Randy showed up in a rusty pickup truck that leaked more oil than the Exxon Valdez, armed with a clipboard and enough confidence to convince himself he knew what he was doing. His professional assessment concluded that my corn farming operation reduced nearby property values by 23%, The report looked impressive until you realized it was written in Comic Sans font and included a section about agricultural odors negatively impacting suburban tranquility. Apparently, the smell of healthy soil and growing corn was now considered a public nuisance. Delilah distributed copies to every neighbor within a 5-mile radius, emphasizing how my commercial farming operation was destroying their retirement investments. She organized something called the Millbrook Property Owners Coalition, which sounds impressive until you realize it consisted of 8 households, 3 cats, and Randy's questionable expertise. The coalition threatened a class action lawsuit for agricultural nuisance, claiming my heritage corn project constituted an industrial farming operation that violated the area's residential character. The legal papers arrived via certified mail with the kind of official formatting that intimidates people who don't read the fine print. Time for some professional counterintelligence. I commissioned a legitimate property assessment from Henderson and Associates, a licensed firm that actually knew the difference between agricultural enhancement and property devaluation. Their report was more thorough than a federal investigation and twice as damning to Delilah's narrative. According to actual real estate professionals, agricultural heritage properties increase rural property values by 12 to 18%. Buyers pay premium prices for land with established farming operations, especially those involved in university research partnerships. My operation wasn't destroying property values, it was enhancing them like a vintage wine improves with age. But the real bombshell came when I investigated Randy's credentials. A quick internet search revealed that Delilah's professional assessor had been convicted of real estate fraud in 2019, sentenced to 2 years probation, and permanently barred from conducting property assessments in Iowa. The man couldn't legally assess a lemonade stand, much less property values. Meanwhile, my wife Nora had been conducting her own investigation with the methodical precision of a research librarian who'd discovered a fascinating mystery. Digging through courthouse records with the dedication of an archaeological expedition, she uncovered something that explained Delilah's increasingly desperate behavior. "Ezra, you need to see this," Nora announced over breakfast, spreading documents across our kitchen table like she was planning a military campaign. Delilah's property purchase included undisclosed environmental contamination. The previous owner had operated an auto repair shop on the property for 15 years, using the basement for parts storage and the backyard for fluid disposal. Petroleum products, industrial solvents, and heavy metals had been leaching into the soil since the Clinton administration. The contamination disclosure should have been mandatory, but somehow got buried in the paperwork during the rushed sale. Soil samples would likely reveal contamination requiring expensive remediation, potentially explaining why Delilah was so concerned about property values. Her environmental anxiety wasn't about my farming. It was about her own toxic legacy buried literally in her backyard. Armed with this information, I requested a township environmental inspection of Delilah's property. She responded like a vampire facing sunrise, immediately threatening legal action to block the investigation. Her lawyer, probably another cousin, sent threatening letters claiming the inspection violated her privacy rights and constituted harassment. Environmental Officer Chuck Kowalski, a former Marine who treated bureaucratic obstruction like enemy resistance, proceeded with the inspection anyway. Chuck had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that makes politicians nervous and criminals confess. His soil testing equipment detected petroleum contamination that would make an oil executive blush. The results were devastating. $80,000 in mandatory remediation costs, property declared temporarily uninhabitable pending cleanup, and Delilah's dreams of suburban paradise officially declared a Superfund site in miniature. But Delilah, desperate and cornered like a rabid raccoon, made her most audacious move yet. She accused me of causing the contamination through my chemical farming practices, claiming agricultural runoff had somehow time-traveled to create petroleum contamination that predated my arrival by decades. His toxic farming methods contaminated my property through groundwater leaching, she announced at an emergency township meeting, her voice reaching frequencies that could summon dolphins. He should pay for environmental cleanup as the responsible party. The absurdity was breathtaking. She was claiming that organic heritage corn farming had somehow generated petroleum products and transported them backwards through time to contaminate her property before I'd even moved to Iowa. Township environmental analysis would determine contamination sources through soil dating and chemical fingerprinting, science that would expose her desperate lies like sunlight revealing dust motes. But the investigation would take weeks, and Delilah's financial desperation was accelerating towards something that felt increasingly dangerous. Standing in my cornrows that evening, watching golden stalks sway in the twilight breeze, I could smell autumn approaching with its promise of harvest. But underneath the sweet scent of ripening grain, something else lingered, the metallic tang of desperation and the ozone smell that precedes dangerous storms. Delilah was running out of legal options, which meant she might start considering illegal ones. November brought the kind of bone-deep cold that makes you appreciate central heating and good coffee. I was organizing paperwork for the environmental investigation when I stumbled across something that changed everything, buried in my heritage crop insurance policy details like treasure in a haystack. I'd been treating this insurance like expensive peace of mind, paying $3,200 annually without really understanding what I was protecting. But reading the fine print while sipping coffee that could wake the dead, I realized the true scope of my coverage was absolutely staggering. The $2.1 million wasn't just crop replacement value. It included lost genetic material, research setbacks, seed bank reconstruction costs, and something called biodiversity impact compensation. Each heritage variety had been individually appraised not just for agricultural value, but for its irreplaceable contribution to genetic research and pharmaceutical development. Dr. Yamamoto explained it during our weekly check-in, her voice crackling with excitement over the phone. Ezra, if any of these varieties were destroyed, we'd lose genetic sequences that took centuries to develop naturally. The university partnership agreement includes mandatory genetic documentation, making each variety exponentially more valuable if eliminated. The insurance math was mind-bending. Losing even one heritage variety would trigger catastrophic research penalties, forcing us to rebuild genetic libraries from scratch. The Cherokee Purple Flint alone was insured for $400,000. Not because corn was expensive, but because its unique drought resistance genes were worth millions in pharmaceutical applications. But Nora's courthouse investigation had revealed something even more explosive about our neighborhood psychopath. Delilah's financial desperation ran deeper than a Kansas oil well. Her property had been purchased with a balloon mortgage, one of those predatory loans that starts with affordable payments before exploding like a financial grenade. The first payment adjustment was due in 4 months, jumping from $1,200 to $3,800 monthly due to variable interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. Environmental cleanup requirements had made refinancing impossible. No bank would touch contaminated property without full remediation. She was facing foreclosure faster than a fumbled football, and environmental liability made her property virtually worthless. The contamination cleanup estimate had risen to $90,000 after additional soil testing revealed decades of automotive fluid disposal. Her suburban dream had become a toxic nightmare with a price tag that could fund a small college. Suddenly, Delilah's escalating attacks made perfect sense. She wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a financially cornered animal making increasingly desperate moves. Her property value obsession wasn't suburban snobbery, it was pure survival instinct. She needed someone to blame for her contamination costs and someone to drive away complaints that might expose her environmental liability. My insurance agent dropped another bombshell during our policy review meeting. Maya Patel, a specialist in agricultural fraud investigation, explained that crop insurance destruction triggers automatic federal review by the FBI's Agricultural Crime Unit. Mr. Caldwell, intentional destruction of federally insured crops isn't just vandalism, it's agricultural terrorism. Penalties include up to 20 years in federal prison and restitution up to 3 times actual damages. The stakes had escalated from neighbor dispute to potential federal crime. My corn wasn't just retirement hobby farming. It was part of a national seed preservation project with international pharmaceutical implications. The university had already cataloged genetic sequences worth millions in research applications, and federal grants pending approval were based on successful harvest and propagation. If someone destroyed my crop, they wouldn't just be vandalizing plants. They'd be eliminating irreplaceable agricultural heritage and sabotaging federally funded scientific research. The FBI takes that kind of crime about as seriously as assassination attempts on federal judges. But the most chilling realization came from studying Delilah's behavioral pattern. Her attacks had been escalating in both frequency and severity, following the classic trajectory of someone losing rational control. Environmental pressure, financial desperation, and legal walls closing in, all ingredients for catastrophic decision-making. Security cameras had captured her making late-night property line visits with various containers. An environmental officer, Chuck, mentioned seeing unusual activity around contaminated soil areas. Someone had been digging at night, possibly trying to hide evidence or plant false contamination sources. Maya warned that desperate people facing federal consequences often make final, spectacular mistakes. When someone's looking at financial ruin and potential criminal charges, they sometimes decide to go out with a bang rather than a whimper. Standing in my heritage cornfield under November's gray sky, I realized we'd moved far beyond HOA politics into dangerous territory where desperation meets federal crime. The sweet scent of drying corn carried an undertone of approaching catastrophe. Delilah was running out of time, money, and legal options, which meant she might be planning something that would destroy us both. December arrived with the kind of sharp clarity that makes every breath visible and every decision crystal clear. After Maya's warning about desperate people making spectacular mistakes, I knew we needed to shift from reactive defense to proactive strategy. Time to assemble a team that could handle whatever nuclear option Delilah was planning. First recruit, Dr. Rachel Yamamoto, who brought scientific credibility and federal connections that could make prosecutors salivate. Rachel arrived at my kitchen table armed with genetic sequencing data that read like a pharmaceutical treasure map, each heritage variety documented down to individual chromosomes, with research applications spanning everything from drought resistance to cancer treatment compounds. Ezra, these varieties represent centuries of natural selection that can't be replicated in laboratories, she explained, spreading colorful charts across Nora's meticulously organized table. Destroying them would be like burning the Library of Alexandria, except the books contained cures for diseases we haven't discovered yet. Next, Chuck Kowalski, environmental officer turned agricultural crime consultant. Chuck brought military precision to evidence collection and the kind of bureaucratic navigation skills that could guide missiles through red tape. His environmental investigation had revealed contamination dating back to the Bush administration, the first one, creating an ironclad timeline that demolished Delilah's blame-shifting fantasies. Ma'am's got herself a classic liability situation, Chuck announced in his deadpan marine delivery. Environmental cleanup's gonna cost more than most people's houses, and ain't no insurance covering deliberate contamination concealment. Maya Patel joined our war council via video call from Des Moines, explaining federal crop insurance fraud protocols with the enthusiasm of someone who'd spent career hunting agricultural criminals. Her expertise would prove invaluable when Delilah crossed federal lines. Agricultural crime unit investigations automatically trigger enhanced penalties for interference, Maya explained, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. If destruction is proven intentional, damages include replacement costs, plus research setbacks, plus punitive damages. Total restitution could exceed $6 million for heritage seed destruction. That number hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. $6 million in federal consequences for torching some hobby farming. Maya explained that heritage crop insurance operates under special federal protection because genetic preservation serves national food security interests. Destroying protected varieties carries the same legal weight as sabotaging strategic grain reserves. Deputy Tommy Brennan completed our team, providing local law enforcement perspective and enhanced surveillance coordination. Tommy had grown increasingly concerned about Delilah's escalating behavior, especially her nighttime property inspections that looked more like reconnaissance missions than casual neighborhood walks. Lady's behavior pattern suggests she's planning something bigger, Tommy observed, adjusting his hat with the careful precision of someone choosing words carefully. Desperate folks facing financial ruin sometimes make decisions that ruin everybody else, too. Our technical strategy focused on comprehensive evidence collection that would satisfy federal investigation standards. Additional security cameras with night vision and motion detection, covering every approach to my cornfield with the thoroughness of Pentagon security. Soil monitoring equipment to detect any tampering with contamination evidence or attempts to plant false contamination sources. We documented all heritage varieties with genetic sequencing and photographic evidence, creating backup seed storage at the university facility as insurance requirement. Every kernel was cataloged, DNA mapped, and secured off-site where Delilah's desperation couldn't reach it. The financial investigation revealed the full scope of Delilah's motivation. Her balloon mortgage payment adjustment would trigger in 8 weeks. Environmental cleanup requirements made refinancing impossible, and her property's contamination liability exceeded her insurance coverage by $60,000. She was facing personal bankruptcy, property foreclosure, and potential environmental criminal charges, a financial perfect storm that could drive rational people to irrational extremes. But our most important preparation was psychological. Maya explained that agricultural crime investigators move slowly but comprehensively, building cases that federal prosecutors love to pursue. Once investigations begin, they examine entire behavior patterns rather than individual incidents. Enhanced penalties apply when crimes target federally funded research, and conviction rates exceed 90% because evidence collection follows FBI protocols. The key is maintaining professional demeanor regardless of provocation, Maya advised during our final planning session. Federal investigators respect farmers who document everything calmly and systematically. They don't appreciate people who appear to entrap suspects into criminal behavior. Tommy coordinated with agricultural extension agents across Iowa, building a support network for sustainable agriculture advocacy that could provide character witnesses if legal proceedings escalated. The farming community rallies around heritage preservation like protective parents around threatened children, political support that carries weight with federal prosecutors. Chuck's environmental monitoring revealed Delilah's increasing nighttime activity around contaminated soil areas. Someone was definitely digging after midnight, possibly attempting to relocate contamination evidence or create false trails leading toward my property. Her desperation was manifesting in increasingly reckless behavior that suggested final preparations for something catastrophic. All systems were in place by late December, surveillance equipment humming quietly, backup seeds secured at university facilities, legal team on standby, and federal investigators monitoring the situation with the patient intensity of big cats watching prey. We transformed from reactive victims into proactive defenders, ready for whatever desperate finale Delilah was orchestrating. The question wasn't whether she'd make her move. It was whether we'd be ready when desperation finally overwhelmed whatever remained of her rational judgment. The crisp winter air carried the scent of dormant soil and approaching confrontation, while security cameras maintained silent vigil over fields that held the genetic heritage of centuries and the potential destruction of one woman's last desperate gamble. January brought the kind of bitter cold that makes your nostrils freeze and your breath crystallize before it hits the ground. The corn had been harvested and safely stored, but Delilah's desperation was reaching a rolling boil that could melt Arctic ice. Her balloon mortgage payment had adjusted right on schedule, and watching her financial world collapse was like witnessing a train wreck in slow motion, horrifying but impossible to ignore. Security cameras captured her first major sabotage attempt on a Tuesday night when the temperature hovered around -15. She'd somehow acquired a shipment of European corn borer insects, nasty little critters that are illegal to transport in Iowa without agricultural permits. Night vision footage showed her releasing purchased pests along our property line like some kind of suburban bioterrorist, apparently hoping the insects would destroy my stored seed corn and contaminate next year's planting. What she didn't realize was that corn borers can't survive Iowa winters without heated environments, and releasing non-native agricultural pests constitutes federal bioterrorism under agricultural protection statutes. The woman had accidentally escalated from neighborhood harassment to potential federal terrorism charges, a legal leap that would make Olympic high jumpers jealous. Dr. Yamamoto's agricultural extension contacts identified the insects within hours, confirming they were illegally transported European varieties that could devastate regional corn production if they'd survived the cold. Agricultural authorities treat invasive species introduction about as seriously as nuclear proliferation. One phone call triggered federal investigation protocols that would make Delilah's previous legal troubles look like parking tickets. But her desperation was just getting warmed up. By February, facing foreclosure proceedings and mounting environmental cleanup costs, Delilah attempted something that would have impressed organized crime families, bribing a federal official. She approached Township Inspector Garrett, still her cousin, still ethically challenged, with $5,000 cash and a proposal that belonged in a corruption textbook. The plan was elegantly simple. Garrett would file false reports claiming my operation violated commercial farming restrictions, triggering federal grant investigation and potential funding suspension. What Delilah didn't know was that Tommy had been monitoring Garrett for months due to previous corruption complaints. Small-town nepotism combined with federal oversight creates surveillance opportunities that would make intelligence agencies proud. Tommy's sting operation captured the entire bribery attempt on audio and video surveillance that could convict saints of singing off-key. Federal investigators now had Delilah attempting bioterrorism, bribery of federal officials, environmental evidence tampering, and systematic harassment of federally funded agricultural research. Her legal troubles were multiplying faster than agricultural pests in perfect growing conditions. Meanwhile, her social media campaign reached levels of creativity that would impress fiction writers. She'd created multiple fake accounts to spread rumors about my chemical contamination, posting fabricated photos claiming to show dead wildlife near my property. Her email campaign targeted university officials with allegations that I was exploiting federal grant systems for personal profit. Digital forensics traced every fake account back to her devices faster than bloodhounds following bacon trails. The woman had left electronic fingerprints on enough criminal activity to supply evidence for a federal prosecutor's entire career. Each false report, each fabricated photo, each fraudulent email created additional federal charges that were stacking up like cordwood in a Minnesota winter. But her most audacious attempt came in early March, when spring thaw revealed the full scope of her environmental desperation. Chuck's soil monitoring equipment detected someone attempting to dump motor oil near my irrigation system at 2 a.m., apparently planning to claim my farming operation had caused additional environmental contamination. Infrared cameras captured Delilah carrying oil containers across the frozen ground like a one-woman environmental disaster, completely unaware that federal surveillance had been documenting her every move for months. The attempted frame-up was so clumsy it looked like a community theater production of environmental crime drama. Federal Environmental Crime Division joined the investigation after this latest stunt, adding charges for attempted evidence tampering, false environmental reporting, and conspiracy to commit federal environmental fraud. Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI Agricultural Crime Unit officially opened a comprehensive investigation that would examine Delilah's entire pattern of criminal behavior. "Ma'am's graduated from neighborhood nuisance to federal criminal enterprise," Chuck observed with his characteristic Marine understatement. Environmental frame-ups against federal grant recipients carry enhanced penalties that make regular environmental crime look like jaywalking. The financial pressure cooker was reaching explosive levels. Delilah's mortgage company had accelerated foreclosure proceedings, environmental cleanup estimates had risen to $120,000, and her property had been declared uninhabitable, pending full remediation. She was renting temporary housing while facing federal criminal charges that could result in decades of imprisonment. Her desperation had reached the kind of critical mass that nuclear physicists study in theoretical models. Late-night surveillance showed her making frantic phone calls to various co-conspirators, gesturing wildly while pacing her contaminated backyard like a caged animal planning escape. Tommy's intelligence network suggested she was planning something catastrophic for harvest season, possibly targeting my stored seed corn or attempting massive property destruction that would eliminate evidence of her crimes while maximizing damage to my operation. Federal surveillance teams were monitoring her communications and financial transactions, building a case that would make prosecution textbooks for decades. But the immediate concern was preventing whatever final desperate act she was orchestrating. The approaching spring carried scents of melting snow and budding disaster, while federal agents maintained round-the-clock surveillance of a suburban criminal enterprise that had started with noise complaints and escalated to agricultural terrorism. Delilah was cornered, desperate, and running out of time, the most dangerous combination in criminal psychology. April arrived with the kind of hopeful warmth that makes you believe winter nightmares are finally over. But Delilah's desperation had reached thermonuclear levels. Her foreclosure notice was final, environmental cleanup deadlines were approaching like freight trains, and federal criminal charges were multiplying faster than rabbits in springtime. All her legal escape routes had been systematically eliminated, leaving only one option that terrified everyone involved: complete scorched earth destruction. Federal surveillance had documented her recruiting additional co-conspirators with the organizational skills of someone planning a military campaign. Cousin Garrett, facing his own federal bribery charges, had agreed to participate in whatever final scheme she was orchestrating. Her ex-husband Dwight, recently paroled from white-collar fraud conviction, joined the conspiracy with the enthusiasm of someone who'd already burned all his bridges and was shopping for matches. The arson plot emerged through wiretapped phone conversations that read like a criminal instruction manual. Delilah planned to destroy my entire heritage corn operation during the spring planting season when maximum damage would eliminate both stored seeds and future growing potential. She'd been purchasing gasoline and accelerants using cash at multiple locations across 3 counties, building an arsenal that could torch half of Iowa. Her strategy was diabolically simple: burn everything during the annual Millbrook County Agricultural Heritage Festival when my family would be attending community events. The timing would provide alibis while ensuring maximum witnesses to the tragic accident caused by my unsafe agricultural equipment. She planned to claim the fire started from faulty grain storage systems, shifting blame while eliminating evidence of her previous crimes. Federal surveillance teams documented every purchase, every planning meeting, every criminal conversation with the meticulous precision of accountants auditing tax returns. The FBI Agricultural Crime Unit had upgraded their investigation to include domestic terrorism charges, environmental destruction, conspiracy to commit federal crimes, and insurance fraud on a scale that would make corporate executives blush. Meanwhile, I continued normal spring preparations while federal agents monitored from concealed positions. The contrast was surreal. I was preparing soil for heritage corn planting while federal investigators prepared evidence for terrorism prosecution. Dr. Yamamoto completed emergency seed preservation protocols, securing genetic samples at university facilities where Delilah's desperation couldn't reach them. The insurance investigator's trap reached its climax during a secretly recorded meeting that would make undercover operation textbooks. Maya Patel, posing as a corrupt investigator sympathetic to Delilah's situation, arranged a meeting where Delilah confessed to previous sabotage attempts and detailed her arson plans with the thoroughness of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. "I've been trying to get rid of that farmer for months," Delilah explained to Maya's recording equipment, apparently believing she'd found a co-conspirator in federal crime. "If his whole operation burns down, the insurance money gets split and everyone benefits. Rural properties look better without agricultural eyesores anyway." Federal agents monitoring the conversation probably needed medical attention from laughing so hard. Delilah had just confessed to agricultural terrorism, insurance fraud, and conspiracy charges, while describing her victims as eyesores that deserve destruction. The recording alone could convict entire criminal organizations. But the most chilling revelation came from Chuck's environmental monitoring equipment. Delilah had been attempting to plant additional contamination evidence around my property boundaries, apparently planning to claim that fire damage had exposed my hidden environmental crimes. Her frame-up strategy included fabricating petroleum contamination that would make me liable for her cleanup costs while providing cover for her arson attack. Federal environmental crime agents documented real-time evidence tampering that added obstruction of justice and federal evidence manipulation charges to her growing legal collection. The woman was accumulating federal charges faster than a Vegas slot machine dispensing jackpots, each new crime creating enhanced penalty multipliers that would keep federal prosecutors busy for years. April 15th marked the point of no return. Delilah's foreclosure became final. Environmental cleanup notices triggered automatic liens, and federal criminal investigation expanded to include domestic terrorism task force oversight. She was facing life imprisonment, complete financial destruction, and permanent criminal designation that would make employment at McDonald's impossible. The night before the Heritage Festival, federal surveillance captured Delilah and her accomplices, conducting final preparations with military precision. Gasoline distribution, ignition device placement, escape route planning, everything documented in high-definition video that would make prosecution easier than convicting arsonists caught holding lit matches. But federal agents faced a delicate balance, allowing enough criminal activity to ensure conviction while preventing actual destruction of irreplaceable genetic heritage. The corn varieties I was protecting represented centuries of agricultural evolution that couldn't be replicated in laboratories, making prevention as important as prosecution. Tommy coordinated with fire departments and emergency services, ensuring rapid response capabilities while maintaining surveillance secrecy. Federal agents positioned themselves for immediate intervention if public safety became threatened, but the goal was capturing terrorists in the act rather than preventing their attempt entirely. The April air carried scents of rich soil and approaching planting season, mixed with the metallic tension of federal law enforcement preparing for domestic terrorism intervention. Heritage Festival preparations continued normally, while federal agents maintained invisible vigilance over a criminal conspiracy that had escalated from noise complaints to agricultural terrorism. Tomorrow would bring either Delilah's final desperate gambit or her complete federal takedown, possibly both simultaneously in a confrontation that would make agricultural crime textbooks for generations. The stage was set for a showdown between suburban desperation and federal justice, with Iowa's agricultural heritage hanging in the balance. April 16th dawned with the kind of perfect spring weather that makes you believe in fresh beginnings. Sunshine filtering through budding trees, air so clean it practically sparkled, and the sweet scent of earth ready for planting. The Millbrook County Agricultural Heritage Festival was in full swing by 10 a.m., with over 500 attendees including state agricultural officials, university researchers, and enough media coverage to make politicians jealous. My Heritage Corn exhibition had become the festival's centerpiece despite the previous night's attempted arson. Federal agents had intervened at exactly 11:47 p.m., capturing Delilah and her accomplices during their gasoline-fueled terrorism attempt. The fire had been extinguished before damaging more than a few dozen stalks, preserving both genetic heritage and criminal evidence in one spectacular federal operation. But Delilah, released on emergency bail pending federal terrorism charges, had the audacity to show up at the festival like nothing had happened. She arrived wearing designer sunglasses and enough makeup to stock a theater company, apparently believing she could brazen her way through federal criminal charges with suburban confidence. The crowd buzzed with barely contained excitement as Dr. Yamamoto prepared her presentation on heritage seed preservation. Agricultural journalism was covering the story of genetic recovery. Local TV news was investigating the unusual criminal activity in our peaceful farming community, and social media was exploding with updates from Iris's documentation of our harassment saga. Federal agents maintained discreet positions throughout the festival grounds, gathering final witness statements and ensuring public safety while allowing Delilah enough rope to hang herself publicly. Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI Agricultural Crime Unit had coordinated media access to demonstrate community impact of agricultural terrorism, a calculated decision that would make prosecution even easier. That's when Delilah made her final, catastrophic mistake. Instead of maintaining low profile while facing federal charges, she attempted to disrupt my corn exhibition with false accusations and environmental claims delivered at maximum volume to assembled crowds. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're being deceived," she announced, commandeering the microphone like a televangelist having a breakdown. "This man has contaminated our community with illegal agricultural chemicals while defrauding federal grant programs." The crowd's reaction was immediate and brutal. 500 people who understood the difference between legitimate farming and suburban hysteria watched in stunned silence as a woman facing federal terrorism charges accused her victim of crimes she'd attempted herself. Dr. Yamamoto stepped forward with the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with agricultural ignorance. "Ma'am, genetic sequencing has confirmed that Mr. Caldwell's preservation work has recovered 3 corn varieties thought extinct since the 1890s. His research has secured federal grants totaling $2.8 million for expanded heritage seed programs." The mic drop moment arrived when Agent Chen publicly acknowledged the investigation completion. "Ladies and gentlemen, federal charges include agricultural terrorism, insurance fraud, environmental evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. The attempted destruction would have eliminated irreplaceable agricultural genetic material valued at over $8 million when research applications are included." The crowd's stunned silence transformed into something resembling a lynch mob that had discovered they'd been protecting the victim all along. 500 farmers, agricultural researchers, and rural families who understood heritage preservation watched a suburban terrorist attempt to destroy their agricultural heritage for personal financial gain. Local farmers pledged immediate support for expanded seed preservation programs. State agricultural officials announced designation of Millbrook County as Iowa's premier heritage crop preservation center. University representatives committed additional research funding that would transform our community into a regional agricultural science hub. Meanwhile, Chuck Kowalski delivered environmental justice with the precision of a federal prosecutor. Contamination investigation confirms all petroleum products originated from previous property owner's automotive operation. Attempted evidence tampering actually delayed cleanup and increased remediation costs to $180,000. The financial reckoning was swift and merciless. Mortgage companies accelerated foreclosure due to criminal charges and environmental violations. Insurance companies canceled all policies due to fraud convictions. Federal asset forfeiture proceedings targeted everything connected to the criminal enterprise, including Cousin Garrett's township position and ex-husband Dwight's parole status. Federal prosecutors announced 47 separate criminal charges spanning agricultural terrorism, environmental crimes, fraud, bribery, and conspiracy statutes. Minimum sentencing guidelines suggested 15 to 20 years federal imprisonment, plus complete restitution for research damages, environmental cleanup, and investigation costs. The educational component transformed tragedy into triumph. Dr. Yamamoto demonstrated genetic sequencing equipment to fascinated crowds, explaining how heritage preservation protects agricultural biodiversity for future generations. Children participated in hands-on activities about sustainable farming and conservation science, while university students distributed information about agricultural research careers. The symbolic victory was complete when festival activities continued successfully, despite attempted sabotage. Heritage corn exhibitions drew record crowds and national attention. Agricultural community unity triumphed over individual greed and suburban entitlement. Scientific research defeated willful ignorance with evidence and education. As federal marshals led Delilah away from the festival grounds in handcuffs, her final shriek of protest was drowned out by 500 people applauding agricultural heritage preservation. The contrast was perfect. community celebration surrounding individual destruction, scientific triumph over criminal desperation. The April sunshine warmed faces turned toward future possibilities, while heritage corn varieties swayed in gentle breezes, their genetic secrets preserved for generations who would never know how close agricultural terrorism came to destroying centuries of natural selection. Justice had been served with Iowa farm fresh satisfaction, seasoned with federal prosecution and garnished with community support that would last longer than any prison sentence. 6 months later, standing in the same field where charred corn once lay like broken dreams, I watched golden heritage varieties sway in September breeze while university students collected soil samples that would help feed future generations. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. What had started as one woman's suburban terrorism campaign had become a catalyst for agricultural innovation that would benefit communities for decades. Delilah received 18 years in federal prison plus $8.2 million in restitution after pleading guilty to agricultural terrorism, environmental fraud, and conspiracy charges. Her property was forfeited to fund environmental cleanup and agricultural research, while cousin Garrett earned 5 years for federal bribery and conspiracy. The legal precedent established by their case now protects heritage farmers nationwide from suburban harassment and agricultural sabotage. The Millbrook Heritage Seed Center opened in spring with $2.8 million in federal funding plus insurance settlement money, creating a world-class agricultural research facility in rural Iowa. Dr. Yamamoto serves as director, coordinating with universities across America to preserve genetic varieties that pharmaceutical companies are already licensing for medical research. Our humble corn operation had evolved into a scientific powerhouse that employs 40 researchers and generates millions in economic activity. The agricultural education program brings student researchers from major universities to our rural community every semester, studying heritage genetics while contributing to local economy through housing, dining, and research expenditures. What used to be quiet farmland now buzzes with scientific activity that puts us on academic maps worldwide. Heritage crop tourism has transformed Millbrook County into a destination for agricultural enthusiasts and educational groups. Guided tours explain genetic preservation techniques while showcasing farming methods that sustain civilizations for centuries. School groups from Chicago and Des Moines visit regularly, connecting urban students with agricultural heritage that feeds their communities. Environmental restoration became a model for communities nationwide. Delilah's contaminated property was cleaned using innovative corn-based bioremediation techniques developed from my research, proving that agriculture can heal environmental damage while generating economic value. The cleanup process attracted EPA attention and resulted in federal funding for similar projects across the Midwest. My family found purpose beyond our wildest retirement dreams. Nora opened a rural library branch specializing in agricultural research and historical preservation, becoming a resource center for farmers and researchers throughout Iowa. Iris received full scholarship to Iowa State Agricultural Engineering Program, inspired by our heritage preservation work to pursue genetic research that could address global food security challenges. The Silas Caldwell Heritage Seed Fellowship now awards $50,000 annually to rural students pursuing agricultural science, funded through insurance settlements and ongoing heritage crop sales. Priority goes to students from communities facing agricultural to suburban development pressure, ensuring that rural knowledge transfers to the next generation of agricultural innovators. The practical takeaways from our experience have helped farmers nationwide. Heritage crop insurance through USDA programs can transform hobby farming into serious financial protection by covering genetic research value rather than commodity prices. Federal agricultural crime units treat farm sabotage as terrorism with enhanced penalties that make harassment extremely expensive for perpetrators. Environmental liability research prevents property disputes from escalating by establishing contamination history before conflicts develop. National recognition followed our preservation success. The Smithsonian Agricultural Heritage Collection requested seed samples for permanent preservation, ensuring that Uncle Silas's genetic treasures will survive even if natural disasters strike Iowa. 3 doctoral dissertations now study genetic sequences from our recovered varieties, contributing to scientific knowledge that may develop drought-resistant crops for climate change adaptation. Policy changes strengthened agricultural protection across Iowa based on precedents from our case. Right-to-farm laws now include enhanced penalties for systematic harassment of heritage operations, while environmental crime enforcement received additional funding for rural community protection. The neighbor relations transformation exceeded our hopes. New HOA leadership dissolved harassment policies and embraced agricultural heritage as community asset. Property values increased 20% after heritage agriculture designation, proving that farming enhances rather than diminishes rural property values. Annual harvest festivals bring regional visitors who support local businesses while celebrating agricultural traditions. But the real victory was proving that knowledge, patience, and community cooperation defeat individual greed and suburban entitlement. Standing among heritage corn varieties that represent centuries of agricultural wisdom, surrounded by students learning genetic preservation techniques, I realized we'd protected something far more valuable than retirement income. We'd preserved agricultural heritage for generations who will face challenges we can't imagine, armed with genetic tools that survived one woman's desperate attempt to destroy them. If you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments. The wilder the better, because apparently suburban terrorism is more common than anyone realizes. And if you learned something about heritage crop insurance or federal agricultural crime enforcement, hit that subscribe button, because these justice stories are just getting started. The evening breeze carried sweet scents of genetic history preserved for tomorrow's harvest, while distant university lights reminded us that science and community had triumphed over desperation and greed.
That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.